"My father, it's not the right time," was all the bishops said, nothing more. But in that phrase lay everything he dared not say aloud. The convention hall was thick with incense and tension, for ballots had already failed to yield a decision. The bishops, bound by a vow of absolute secrecy, sensed that something unusual was unfolding. In the latest round, the name of Bishop Augustine Mwangi, Archbishop of Chicago, had begun appearing on too many ballots. A brilliant man, educated in New York, multilingual, close to the people, with decades of pastoral and theological service. Some said his sermon during the opening Mass had swayed opinions. Others believed he represented the future. But not everyone was ready for that future. During lunch in the private refectory of the convention, Bishop Philip Arlotti ate in silence, his expression twisted. Beside him, Marco Velez from Texas played with his bread without touching it. "Do you realize what they're trying to do?" Arlotti murmured, lowering his voice but keeping his eyes on the table. "They're pushing him," Velez responded without looking up. "Some believe he's the perfect symbol for these times. Diversity, inclusion. Empty words for an eternal position. It's not racism," Arlotti clarified, though he didn't fully believe it himself. "It's prudence. An African American in the seat of national religious leadership under these circumstances would be overwhelmed." Velez nodded, almost relieved not to have to say it himself. That afternoon, during the fifth vote, Mwangi reached 62 votes, just 12 short, and they knew it. There were still undecided voters. That night, in the silent corridors of the convention center, Arlotti began his work. In small conversations, in whispers between prayers and slow walks, he started sowing doubt. "Do you really know him?" he asked a bishop from Ohio. "Have you seen him under political pressure? He's a good pastor, no doubt, but presiding bishop?" Velez spoke with the Latino bishops, appealing to shared history and church unity. "This isn't a symbolic election. We're not voting for a gesture, but for a universal pastor. There are names with more universal experience." Bishop Tremblay from Canada sensed the tense atmosphere and quickly understood what was happening. During the sixth vote, he saw Mwangi's numbers drop to 47, a sharp decline. That night, Mwangi said nothing, only ate in silence, thanking each server with a slight smile. He could read faces, and his supporters were beginning to lose faith. The next day, everything changed. There was talk of consensus, of unity, of healing wounds before they opened. A new name began circulating: Bishop Benedetti from Boston, a man of good manners, moderate profile, European appearance. No one rejected him, though few were enthusiastic. Bishop Souza from Brazil confronted Arlotti in one of the hallways before the seventh vote. "You're setting the church back 20 years, he said with restrained anger. "I'm protecting it," Arlotti replied calmly. "We've had enough crises." Mwangi received 29 votes in the next round. The temperature in the convention hall dropped, and Benedetti's count rose. After that vote, Bishop Mwangi paused for a second in front of the altar and, without looking at anyone, made the sign of the cross. He said nothing. The eighth vote confirmed the shift. Augustine Mwangi received only 19 votes. The bloc that had grown strong in the early rounds had silently crumbled. Benedetti reached 60, just too short. After the vote, the bishops dispersed through the convention center's inner gardens, walking in silence, talking in small groups, sharing what they couldn't say aloud during the vote. It was in those moments that everything was truly decided, that in a small lounge with closed curtains and dense air, 8 bishops, African American, Asian, and Latino, gathered. Confusion marked their faces. Bishop Tremblay entered shortly after. "They're succeeding," he said bitterly, closing the door. "They're turning votes one by one with fear, not faith." One of the African American bishops, A.O. Balua, stood up. "They're saying it's not about his race, but about the timing, that the world isn't ready, that he lacks symbolic weight." "What do they mean by that?" Tremblay looked at him with narrowed eyes. "What they don't dare say aloud, they express with soft phrases. It's not the right time, as if it ever is." Meanwhile, in another more austere and darker room, Philip Arlotti and Marco Velez spoke with a smaller group of European bishops and 2 Asians. Listen carefully, Arlati said, walking slowly in front of them, hands clasped behind his back. No one here questions Bishop Mwangi's faith or preparation. But this chair, he pointed toward the convention hall, this chair carries the weight of centuries. There are churches that wouldn't accept an African-American presiding bishop. They would divide. And unity? One asked hesitantly. Precisely for unity, Valles interjected. There are entire dioceses in Eastern Europe, Asia, even in the United States, where this wouldn't be seen as an opening gesture, but as a rupture. They would resist, and we can't afford that. Arlati leaned in, lowering his voice. The world isn't ready. You know it. They want to make a symbol, but the national church isn't a symbol. It's continuity, it's balance. No one responded immediately, but the silence was acceptance. That night, in the convention center's dining area, Bishop Mwangi dined alone. Several bishops who used to approach him in the early days now passed by with nervous smiles. There was no hostility, but there was distance, and that hurt more. Bishop Souza, upon seeing him, sat beside him. He said nothing for minutes. "Why don't you say something?" he finally asked. Mwangi looked up. "I didn't come to fight. I came to obey. If this isn't my time, so be it. But they'll know it wasn't God who closed the door. It was them." Souza pressed his lips together, wanting to say something but finding no words. The next day, the 9th vote, Benedetti received 64 votes, just one short. In the convention hall, the atmosphere was heavy, contained. Everyone knew they were about to conclude the election. When the count was read, no one celebrated. Mwangi had 17. The rest were scattered protest votes. They prepared to leave in silence. Arlati approached Valles and murmured, "One more." Valles nodded, but not everyone was ready to surrender. At that moment, Bishop Tremblay requested to speak. It was uncommon to speak during the convention, but not forbidden. The silence in the hall became absolute. "Brothers," he began firmly, without looking at papers, "before one more yields to the pressure of the moment, I want you to remember that less than 24 hours ago, many of you believed the Holy Spirit spoke through Mwangi. Now you doubt because someone told you the world isn't ready? Since when do we obey the world?" Several bishops lowered their gaze. Arlati crossed his arms, annoyed. "Today, perhaps, we seal an election. But tomorrow, we'll have to explain why the best man was left behind. And we'll all know the answer, even if no one says it." The silence grew even denser. The tension could be cut with a knife. Mwangi didn't speak. He merely looked at the crucifix, as he did every time they left the vote, this time with moist eyes. The 10th vote was definitive. Bishop Jomo Benedetti, 65 votes. Bishop Augustine Mwangi, 14 votes. Scattered votes, 6. The master of ceremonies began preparations. Soon, the white smoke would rise. The world would see a new election. The ritual would proceed in a side room. While the staff prepared the announcement, some bishops gathered around the newly elected Benedetti. Discreet congratulations, measured pats. The man of low profile accepted everything with a contained and nervous smile. He hadn't sought to be presiding bishop, but hadn't shunned it either. Off to the side, alone, Bishop Mwangi sat, looking at the floor. Beside him, Bishop Souza watched him in silence. "You've been very dignified," he finally said. "More than many of us." Mwangi looked up, smiled. "I'm not hurt by losing," he said calmly. "I'm glad they chose a good man. Benedetti is." Souza frowned, and those who changed their minds, who withdrew their votes without saying a word. Mwangi thought for a second. His lips formed a calm line. "They didn't tell me with words, but I felt it. That silence isn't new. In many places, I've felt it before stepping onto the altar and before giving Massachusetts. I've never needed them to say they're not ready. It's evident in how they look at you, in how they avoid commitment. And that doesn't anger you?" Mwangi shook his head, looked at the cross hanging on one of the walls. "It saddens me, of course, but also gives me peace. Because if the church isn't ready at this moment, at least they heard me, saw me. I was at the table. I was considered." He paused. "And even if I wasn't chosen this time, I won't be the last to come this close." Souza looked at him for a long time, wanted to say more, but at that moment, One of the aides entered. "Eminences, the time has come to dress the presiding bishop." The bishops began to leave in silence. Mwangi stood up slowly, adjusted his robe, and as he headed toward the exit of the room, someone touched his shoulder. It was Bishop Tremblay. "Thank you," he said firmly, needing no further explanation. Mwangi nodded. That word, in that place, carried weight. In the convention hall, the new presiding bishop was taken to pray in private. Outside, the bells began to ring. The white smoke was already rising. Inside, the bishops returned to their seats. Philip Arlati and Marco Velez exchanged a discreet glance, just a slight nod. They had succeeded, but not with joy or certainty. Mwangi, seated at the back, closed his eyes. His face was calm. There was no resentment, only a quiet and resigned sadness, the kind carried by many who have had to be strong in silence more times than they should. The crowd outside erupted in cheers when the announcement was made. We have a new presiding bishop, and the world learned of the new leader. But within the convention center, deep down, a few knew that not every election